good evening, and welcome to House Call with Dr. Gigi. I am, of course, the co-host Ellis Dean, and just here to let you know about how this wonderful show we have for you tonight. So, a couple of things we want you to do before we even get started. Number one, let us know where you're watching from. We'd like to know where people are watching us from all over the world, so drop that in the comment section. Number two, if you know somebody else needs this information, share it on your page, tell a friend, tag them, tell them, hey, we've got some great information being shared on blackdoctor.org right now. I think you should tune in. And then number three, if you have any questions throughout tonight's broadcast, please drop those in the comments, and we'll try to get to them at the end of the show. We have a jam-packed show for you tonight. So we've got multiple segments of all tidbits and tips and all of these things that you can do. And our main topic is the importance of food and sleep for your mental health. So that's our main topic. But we're also going to have news that you can use. We're going to talk about vaccine safety. We're going to talk about the origins of autism. There's another origins of autism, and then we're going to give you some tips and techniques to keep you healthier. So all of that is wrapped in tonight's show. We only got an hour to do it, so I'm going to get to the person that you all came to see, and that is Dr. Gigi. Hello, Dr. Gigi. Oh, I'm sorry, you're on mute. Let me take you
I
on
think
mute.
I'm the only one that they're coming to see. I think it's coming to see you and me together. So it's wonderful to see you as always. And I just want to welcome our audience. You know, I had been on a bit of a hiatus, but we're back and we're every 2 weeks, 7 o'clock. Our next show is going to be May the 29th. And really what we want this show to be is a show for you. I know as a physician what things my patients come in and questions, which is good, but that's not the only thing. There are questions that you may have on your mind, topics that you want to see discussed. And so this is your show, right? This is your show. This is a chance to really kind of dig deeper and also get connected to resources, because God knows these days there's so much misinformation and disinformation. So it's really important, when I have medical students and residents that I'm teaching and I ask them a question, I say, well, what's your source? Because if the source is not reliable, then they could Google an answer off the internet from, TikTok or Instagram. That's not it. Blackdoctor.org's information is vetted, okay, with you as the audience, as the reader, as the target, because it's not about information, it's about being heartfelt. We care about you, we see you, and your health and your well-being is our priority. So it's not just enough to give you information. It has to be in the context and in the framework of love, care, and kindness. So just want to start off with that.
So real quick, you brought up a great point, and so if you could help our audience, because we've been hearing those terms a lot especially over the past, since 2016, misinformation and disinformation. Can you help our audience understand the difference between the two?
Sure, and feel free to jump in, because sometimes with these terms you think you know them, and then it's like, do I really know what I'm talking about? The best way to teach something is to be asked the questions yourself, right? Misinformation is when the information is just wrong. You're told that the sky is green, right? And it's not. That's actually more disinformation. Let me see. Misinformation, it would be going outside after you've had a shower in the cold can cause you to get sick with pneumonia. Okay. So although that's a common thought, actually, when they've done studies, that's not true. Okay. So that's misinformation, just not getting the facts. Disinformation is when people are deliberately trying to mislead you, right? When they want to give you information or whatever, quote unquote, alternative facts to your detriment.
Yes.
Which is really important to focus on that. We could go off on a whole tangent and talk about what's happening. I don't want to get caught up in that, because I think we and our audience, certainly we understand what's going on. Okay. But the trick is to distinguish what is disinformation, because it's packaged very nicely oftentimes, and we'll talk about the measles and autism and all that. Well, maybe we'll just jump into that because I think it's a great way. We can do that at the end of our show. We can.
We'll do that. We'll do that a little bit later on. But our first segment that we're going to talk about, we're going to give people some news that they can use.
Sure.
These little things, and we're going to give you some news that you can use here in your health. And so I wanted to kind of talk about that. And I agree, just to kind of finish the misinformation, disinformation. Misinformation is something that's just wrong, but it's not anybody that's intentionally trying to mislead you. Disinformation is, for lack of a better term, really disingenuous, and it might be a straight out and out lie to try to get you believe something or think a certain way or act a certain way because it's beneficial to them, and so that is very intentional, and it's an act that can be very, very harmful to a great many people. And we see that going on right now. There's a lot of disinformation, particularly in the healthcare space, because of who's running HHS. He seems to be a disinformation kind of purveyor. And so therefore, we have to make sure that we come to sites like blackdoctor.org and other trusted sites to make sure that we're getting the information that it has been vetted and is actual and factual and not trying to lead you down a path. So what's up? What's some news that we could use, Dr.
There is a lot of news. I actually made a long list. I'm going to start off with Parkinson's because we are seeing the number of people getting Parkinson's just skyrocket. The numbers are increasing. So people are like, well, that's because the population is aging, but that is a part of it, but that's not all of it. It turns out that what you eat is a risk factor for Parkinson's, and they've actually quantified it so that if you eat more than 8 processed either meals or snacks in a week, then your risk goes up. So what are we talking about? A hot dog would be one. A can of soda would be another. I mean, if you think about this over time, those things add up. And let me just kind of back up and tell you why, and why highly processed foods. I'm just going to say, I'm not preaching and making myself out to be some Miss Perfect here in terms of my eating habits, as you can see. And I like, a potato chips or a good hot dog every once in a while. But I think it's what we're mainly doing, which is important. So these foods actually cause a low-grade inflammation in our bodies. Low-grade inflammation is bad. Low-grade inflammation can lead to things like diabetes, like heart disease, like Parkinson's, like cancer, like dementia. So here is yet another reason to eat healthier. None of us are going to be perfect, and we're going to have times when we're going to kind of fall off the wagon, a reunion. Reunions are coming up soon, a family reunion or a birthday party and all that. But what do they say? Perfect is the enemy of the good. You try to be mostly mindful of what you're eating. So that's one. That study just came out. I made a little list here. One thing that I found interesting is that a lot of the rice that's being sold actually has arsenic and cadmium. So arsenic is actually present naturally, like it's very common in the subcontinent of India because of the water supply being from wells. There's arsenic. Okay, so why is that a problem? Well, arsenic is a heavy metal that can actually affect your brain and neurologic system. So it can cause numbness. It can cause confusion. I mean, probably for any of us who've watched any of those crime shows, we've seen somebody poison somebody with arsenic. So arsenic is no joke. And if I measured your arsenic level today, Mr. Ellis, there would be an amount. There's a baseline amount that we all have, but we're talking about high levels of arsenic. Cadmium is another chemical that's seen, and it has to do with the processing of the rice, and that is not a good. It's a heavy metal, and that's not necessarily good, right? Things like mercury, for example, which can be in fish, all these kinds of metals. And we can maybe do a separate show just to focus on that because there's a lot to kind of unpack in that. But think about what you're eating. And, we get into patterns of wanting to eat one particular food. It's really important to diversify, right? So if you're eating tuna fish sandwiches 3 days a week, I bet you your mercury levels are going to be high, for example. So diversify. What else is up? Okay, let's talk about infectious diseases. There have been multiple outbreaks of not just measles, but now hepatitis A. And now, very scary from my standpoint as a physician, is something called babesiosis. It's carried by the same tick that causes Lyme disease. It used to be that we would only see it like in New England, Massachusetts, et cetera, et cetera. But now it's made its way down to the DC area, Maryland, Virginia. And so once an infection is making its way in one place, it's gonna, because the animals are very effective in sharing things, because what happens is that you have the organism, and it infects deer. They're deer ticks. And then the deer, which is around us, there we see a lot of deer, they're beautiful, but the ticks that are on the deer then bite us. And that's how we would get Lyme or babesiosis. But the babesiosis is very dangerous, especially for people who have immunocompromised states, people who are on dialysis, people who have gotten an organ transplant, people who are getting chemotherapy, people who are on steroids. Now, a lot of the medications that are being used for things like Crohn's disease or lupus or these which have been life-changing and wonderful, the tax that's associated with them is actually immunosuppression. And so why is that important for people to know? Physicians and clinicians are not used to seeing babesiosis, and time is of the essence in terms of trying to figure out that that's what's going on so that people can be treated. Because you get treated not just with an antibiotic, but an anti-parasite, because it's a parasite. So why should you know? Well, the way that it can present is kind of like Lyme. You can get fever, you can get rash, you can do all of these. The most important thing is, if God forbid you or a loved one are in the hospital, especially with the conditions that I just mentioned, and you have a fever and people can't figure out what it is, ask them to check for babesiosis and Lyme, because we are now seeing these kinds of infectious diseases. They are really spreading very, very quickly. And why infectious diseases are going up. I mean, I don't know about you, Mr. Ellis, but do you remember so many viruses, growing up, and, all these kind of infections? I sure don't. We're going to talk later in the show about how you can reduce getting sick. But part of that is, as there is climate change, the weather is actually impacting how what we call vectors, like mosquitoes, can then carry diseases. So, for example, Washington, D.C. is going to be endemic, probably in another 10 years, for malaria. We used to think of malaria as just existing in places like, the tropics, in the continent of Africa, in the subcontinent of India. But now malaria is here, and it is not just because people are coming from out of the country. Finally, before I move on to the next item, the budget that was cut the most in terms of NIH cuts was the infectious disease department, by and far. They just slashed it. I think the next was cancer funding. They lost a third of their budget. So I can't remember what the exact number. I think for infectious disease, it may have been between 50 and 60%. So that it behooves us then to be educated. And remember, with emerging infectious disease or any disease, doctors, nurses, nurse practitioners, clinicians, we do not know everything. How could we, right? I mean, information is just like we're all inundated by information that we can't keep up with. Imagine all the clinical information, all the breakthroughs, all the warnings, all this and that. So my best patients are the ones that I'm partners with, because they will say, hey, did you think about this, doctor? I'm like, no, thank you for letting me know. And so that brings me to the second point, which is you have to have relationships with your clinician that you trust. I've had my patients correct me. Don't you remember that this is the one that this medicine is the one that gave me the side effect? Or no, I don't think that's a good idea. Or that's the kind of relationship that you want. The ability to disagree, because we're human beings. If I had and I wish and I aspire to have a 95% accuracy rate, that would still leave me with 5%, right, of
Right,
not getting things right.
right.
All right, moving right along. I
But
told.
real quick, and we're not going to talk about it tonight because we've got a whole show planned. But
Mhm.
I think for a future show, let's talk about the suffixes in medicine so people can understand, like
Oh,
itis and osis, because it made me think about when you said babidiosis, and I was like, oh, okay, that's a suffix that's common in medical terminology. That if people could understand what some of those, like itis meaning inflammation, osis meaning an abnormal condition or something like that, they can
mhm,
have a better understanding of when doctors say something and
mhm,
know what they're talking about. Oh, that means this. And when you say hepatitis, that's an inflammation of the liver, and then the letter is what's causing that inflammation. And so when we get that understanding, people can feel more comfortable in going into to see their primary care physician. So when they say something, they go, "Oh, okay, I kind of get it." And so we'll talk about that, and we'll continue to really help educate, because that's what we're here to do, is to inform and educate. Um, and so we'll talk about that and all of the different. We won't talk about all of them because there's a great number, great number.
exactly. There,
But
there
the
is
ones that are most salient to you in terms
absolutely.
of your personality.
And as you were speaking, I was thinking that we should have a panel with all the different healthcare professionals that folks see, because it
Right,
is very confusing. And I think I always talk about the fact that, I'm biased towards pyramids, but really in the healthcare setting, there is no place for them. It
right,
should be the individual, the family, the community, and then we're all spokes on a wheel. So physicians, we bring a particular type of training, nurse practitioners, nurses. So I want to really be able to talk
right.
about that, and we'll bring people with that expertise so that they can speak for themselves and educate the rest of us. Final news item, which is really frightening. The number one cause of death in children and teens is guns. Guns. We worry about kids in our lives getting cancer or getting measles. And of course, those things are important, but it is actually completely preventable. So, for everybody listening, I want you to do me a favor. If you have guns in your home, make sure that they are under lock and key.
Mhm.
If there is somebody that's depressed, please put the guns away so they don't have access to them. Remember, things like suicide or even accidental deaths from guns or intentional ones are usually acts of impulse. People feel some kind of way and they reach for a gun, right? And then there's a tragedy.
Right.
Separate the guns from the bullets. Okay, those should be separated. And then for those of us who maybe don't have children that we're living with, or the kids come on the weekend or whatever, please make sure to put any harmful substances, whether it's guns or things like, cleaning items that we use, like, I'm not going to say a particular one, bleach or whatever, out of children's ways. Because it's very important that we do prevention. When you look back at some of the tragic accidents or the intentional harming of children and teens around guns, the vast majority of them are preventable. So please share this information with others. I don't want to read about another tragic incident, because it's really about safety proofing your home and your lives to kind of minimize risks. So that's my last news you can use.
Fantastic. Why don't we move into our main topic of the evening, and that is the importance of food and sleep for mental health. And we say, well, what does that have to do? Mental health is the brain. So we're going to help you understand, as our audience understand, that there's connection. It's the circle of life that we all learn from the Lion King, right? So we know that,
Or our grandmothers.
or our grandmothers, but it's all connected. And so what we do, what we put into our bodies is not just fuel for us to keep us alive, but it also impacts our moods and it impacts how we feel, not only physically but mentally. And so, Dr. Gigi, let's kick
Sure,
the discussion off about how the food
sure.
and food impact our mental health.
Sure. I'd like to talk about the social determinants of health. Some of you may have already heard it. Some of you probably are experts because we've got different audience members who have expertise. The social determinants of health are those factors that actually predict and impact life expectancy. So, coming to see a clinician only accounts for about 20% of somebody's life expectancy. Education is number one. So if you get educated just by finishing your high school degree, you can add 10 years to your life expectancy. But I want to talk about the social determinants of mental health. Food is number one. So let's talk about what's been happening with food. Because food is becoming really expensive, what are the foods that become more expensive? Well, of course, it's going to be the healthier ones, right?
Yeah.
Fresh produce, fruits, vegetables, whole grains, etc. What are the ones that are going to be cheaper? Are the ultra processed foods, right? The things that that maybe taste good and maybe comfort foods, but in the long run are actually impacting, as we just saw with the news item, our brains, things like Parkinson's.
Yeah.
So, just to give you an example about how food and mental health are impacted, in DC, 85% of the homeless are actually have mental illness.
Mhm.
And so one time I had a patient, lovely guy. Unfortunately, he died of AIDS. He was homeless. And I said to him, actually, it was a student that said, I never know how to act when somebody on the street is asking me for money. Should I give them? Should I not? He said, no, give them something to eat. And I
Mm.
didn't appreciate the wisdom of that answer until I began to learn that food is the number one social determinant of mental health. So, what you eat impacts directly your brain. I mean, let's think about this. All of us have, come back from work or whatever, had something, and I don't know about you, but I will binge and eat whatever chips. But how do I feel afterwards? I don't feel good. I never felt bad after eating an apple ever. But you don't, right? But you
Right.
eat kind of the junk food if that's a steady diet. Again, perfect is the enemy of the good. We will do that sometimes, but that impacts your brain. It impacts your clarity of thought. If you think about it, think
Mhm.
about the last time you got away for any kind of break, whether that was for a day, a weekend, or a vacation, and how you came back feeling. You felt good. You felt rested. You felt like, oh, okay, I'm ready to kind of tackle things. Good food and food that is feeding our minds and our souls, right, and our bodies is crucial. So, what do we do in a setting where prices are going through the roof, where it's more difficult for us to access fresh fruits and vegetables? One thing that I don't think a lot of people appreciate is, first of all, the joy of gardening and how you don't have to have a lot of land to garden. So, my brother, who lives in an apartment, is now growing tomatoes and blueberries.
Oh,
And
wow.
yeah, it turns out he says banana peels. Maybe people in the audience know, and please feel free to comment. Banana peels apparently help the plants grow.
Well,
Yeah.
there's a lot of potassium, and so when you put that in the
Right,
soil,
enriches the
it
soil.
enriches the
Yeah,
soil.
but it's the peels. So
Yeah.
tomatoes, that's an easy one. Any of the herbs that you enjoy, mint or parsley or cilantro, those are things that you can grow as well. For people who have some land, things like cucumbers, watermelons. I remember when we were growing up in East Lansing, my mom, we'd have to, excuse me, sorry, I've got this lingering cough from a virus. This is my lemonade. I have water and then I put a touch of lemon. Um, So we would have to, we would rent a plot of land over the summer. It's at Michigan State University. And she would take us, 3 kids, and we would plant corn and squash and watermelon and all that. And I hated going because the water was, we had to go far away, probably not as far as I felt, far away to get the water and bring it back. But let me tell you, there was nothing as rewarding and as tasty as growing your own food. For anybody that might have SNAP benefits, it turns out that you can actually buy seeds with SNAP
Mm,
benefits. And studies have shown for those people that use those seeds to plant, they actually have so much produce or so many fruits and vegetables that they can sell them to others and actually make some money.
right.
So, not all of us have the capacity or the green thumb to be able to be good gardeners and growers of fruits and vegetables. But this is something where communities can come together and think about having collective, garden plots or a neighborhood, it doesn't have to be anything big. I think, simple, small, and also finding out who in your community, in your neighborhood has the expertise. You might find that the older folks have experience, and that's a way of kind of engaging them. Very important that we begin to look at ways of us producing our own food because we know then sort of what goes into it, what chemicals, etc. I think that that's something that I would suggest. Something else for those of us who are challenged in trying to lose weight, we don't drink enough water. And as you just saw me, sip on something, it can't really be those high sugary beverages. It defeats the purpose of drinking soda or juice or whatever as a means of staying hydrated. I had a friend, Dr. Jackie Lockhart from Detroit, Michigan, at medical school at University of Michigan, who had and she has, I think she has either a LinkedIn or something where this is her thing now. Before she started medical school, she was chunky. She started just drinking a glass of water before every meal and lost like 70 pounds.
Mm,
So, small changes over time can result in big changes. So we have to also think about the timing of our eating. So another study showed that if you start off with a fruit or a vegetable and water, even if you eat some junky food later, that helps to slow down the absorption of those bad things. So even the timing is important. For me personally, I'm a very protein-based person. Now, mind you, I'm not a nutritionist, and we should have a nutritionist come and talk with more intelligence about these specific things. But I find that when I'm in that, I just will have just like a few almonds or some nuts. They really help to put that, snacky kind of craving. It stops it in its tracks. I find a lot of the patients, though, they're like, well, nuts are healthy, so they'll grab a whole, thing of peanuts. Peanuts are really high in fat and oil. So the nuts that I would recommend are almonds. Pecans actually seem to be helpful in reducing Alzheimer's.
mm,
So do walnuts, but it's not big amounts. It's not like you're going to have them sitting out and you're just going to be, popping them like that. You're going to just make sure that you pre-measure and that, you put the whole bag away, or even you can even buy a large bag and put them in smaller baggies so that you know how much you're getting. But I find that's important. That's very helpful. The high protein yogurt, anything with high protein really helps to curb the appetite. But in addition to giving you specifics, and as I say, we'll have a nutritionist on as a guest so that she or he can speak more to the specifics. I just want us to think about, our bodies are our temples, right? And these days, other people are not respecting us and our bodies and our temples, right? So we have to be the keepers of our own temples. We have to think about what we're doing. That's the part that I think in during these times is that kind of hunkering down and focusing inward and saying, okay, this is a marathon, what's going on right now in our society. I need to take care of myself so that I can continue to thrive and overcome this and survive this because it's not easy. So food is just basic. Let's talk about sleep.
Very quickly,
Yes.
we're talking about gardening. And so what's been happening in some of our more progressive cities, not in all cities, but in some of the more progressive cities, that urban planning has been incorporating shared garden spaces. And
Yeah.
so, and some of the benefits through community gardens include social cohesion, increased access to green spaces, and improved health outcomes. Additionally, the Garden City movement and urban planning philosophy emphasizes the creation of self contained communities with green spaces aiming to combine the best aspects of both rural and urban life. And so, just really that process of having, and they've gotten really, really good. So, you don't need a large plot of land. They've gotten really good about building spaces where you can garden up instead of out. And
Right.
so getting involved in that helps it in a number of ways. It can help in terms of, first of all, that sense of accomplishment. And so that it can improve your mental health. As we talked about, the social cohesion, the eating more fresh fruits and vegetables, because that's about as close to organic as you're going to get with regards to growing it yourself. Um, in particular, when we're talking about urban spaces where there are food deserts, and I know we've heard that term before, where you have to go very, very far to get to fresh spaces. Having a garden, a shared garden space, increases the community sense of community. So there's a lot of benefits that come from gardening, not just outside of your individual health benefits by eating more fruits and vegetables.
Of course. It's really what we're talking about is kind of recreating the community and getting back into the sense that we're all in this together. Something that unfortunately has been lost for a myriad of reasons that I will not discuss at this point. But what you described, sort of the growing up, like the hydroponics, there are some places here in DC where they've been really great about bringing them in, and they are nutrient dense. I mean, you have a very small, relatively small space, and the amount of uh, especially herbs and other green vegetables that are produced is quite high. I just want to give a shout out to the H Street Bridge farm. I don't know exactly what their name is, but this is a group of people that for decades now has been using an underpass in Southeast and growing fruits and vegetables.
Hmm.
And so there are lots of initiatives out there. So if you're like, I don't even know where to begin, please just look around in your community, Google it. You'll find that there are lots of
Oh yeah,
wonderful.
I just did a quick Google search and pulled up stuff that's happening here in Atlanta, where we're
Yes,
adding as they're developing areas and redeveloping areas of the city that have been
right.
lost and downtrodden. They are adding urban, gardening centers because that tends to lead itself to more sense of community and getting rid of, not really getting rid of it, but just kind of diminishing the importance of having that corner store with a lot of processed food, as we learned earlier,
Yeah.
can lead to
That's why
population.
we call them food swamps, not deserts.
Yeah.
Deserts means there's nothing, but these are swamps because of all the. I always joke, I have never seen as many brands of potato chips as when I go to the corner store in Southeast DC. I mean, I didn't know that you could have that many flavors of potato chips, and also the size of the alcohol, the huge beer cans, but so yeah, that's I think something to consider, and also rooftops, by the way, for people who are living in apartment buildings. That's a place where you can grow things. But there are lots of people doing great work. Please check them out. And what term did you use when you Googled, Mr. Ellis?
I just did urban planning, including gardens.
Okay. How can you see if just putting in gardening in our neighborhoods or something like that would what that would come up with? Because I don't know for myself. I would necessarily think of the words urban planning. Yeah. So, okay. So, and then let's not forget that actually gardening and having that actually helps the quality of air in the environment.
Well, what's coming up is there's a lot of places that are coming up where you can garden that are in urban areas here in Atlanta.
Okay.
And then there's some tutorials on how to grow your own food,
Great.
uh, budget-friendly gardening resources and stores.
Hmm.
That's a Reddit. There is a planting calendar on the Old
Hmm.
Farmer's Almanac that you can
Hmm.
talk about when to plant because you have to
Hmm.
rotate your crops, and that's something that
Yeah.
enslaved people brought to America because they were destroying the soil because they weren't rotating their crops properly. The planter class here did not understand how to
You're
rotate.
trying to bait me. You're trying to bait me, and I
I'm
keep
not trying
trying
to
to
bait
stay
you.
on point.
I'm speaking facts of historical fact. I'm not trying to
Oh,
bait
I
you. Sorry.
know. There are lots of
Uh,
facts in terms of that.
yes, but then there's a lot of videos, YouTube videos that you can um, and just how that gardening to do tips by month. So here for Atlanta, so if you Google that gardening in your city, just put gardening in and wherever you're living, there'll probably be a lot of resources available to
Great.
you to kind of teach you how to do it.
Terrific. And you know, it's a really great intergenerational activity. My mom, who loves to plant, seeds, she'll put like a half a, potato, sweet potato. Let me tell you, sweet potatoes have the best leaves. They're beautiful. But what she did, maybe a year ago, she gave her great grandkids little Dixie cups with a seed in them,
Mm,
a little potato seed, so that they could watch that. So it just is a way of engaging everybody, and it's forming good habits. All right. So we talked a
great.
little bit, we scratched the surface on food, but I'm very mindful of the time. So are we ready to move on to sleep?
Yes.
Okay. So I used to be somebody that would put my head on the pillow and I would be out and it was easy. And lately, I've not been able to do that. I think the stresses and these things. I mean, I am guilty. I give the advice to people all the time. My brother was telling me today, "Are you using your phone before you go to sleep?" I'm like, "Yeah." He says, "I said, I tell that to my patients all the time, but I'm guilty. I think given everything that's going on, it's like, I don't know about you, but I feel like the shoe is about to drop. I never know what's going to happen. This time of uncertainty where things are just, it's like whiplash, right? And
Right.
somehow being connected to this, I don't know if it gives you a measure of comfort or whatever. It doesn't make logical sense, but this is something that is impacting quality of sleep and our mental health. So let's talk about what happens to the brain when one is sleeping. Okay. So the brain is an incredible, incredible organ, and it is like command central. It basically controls all of the functions of the various systems, our kidneys, our heart, our liver, etc. There are actually, we talk about circadian clocks that regulate our rhythm. But there are also, so there's a huge one in our brain, but there are probably multiple ones in each of our organs. So when we're not sleeping well, everything goes out of whack. It becomes completely unsynchronized. And so we will have a special guest to come and talk to us about that work because it's very interesting.
Mhm.
Basically, our brain and our bodies produce all kinds of byproducts of just living that need to be cleared out. When does the brain clear those things out? When we are sleeping. If we are not sleeping, all of those byproducts, if you want to even think of it as waste products, if you will, accumulate. And guess what? Not sleeping equals developing dementia.
Mm.
Now, there are some people, I just was reading a study just today in preparing for our show. Some people, rare groups, are just hardwired to have like 4 hours of sleep. Those are rare individuals. And actually, you will see them in various professions. Surgeons. They don't need a lot of sleep. It almost like they self-select. Psychiatrists need a lot of sleep, right? But you kind of things draw you to what is natural for you. But I find surgeons they just don't need as much sleep. But what has anybody ever seen the movie Inside Out? It's
Yes.
that Pixar movie, which is a great movie and really does a great job of explaining the brain. So remember in that one part where the people are cleaning up the brain while what's her name? I can't remember the character's name is sleeping.
Right.
So they're clearing all the things that are not needed, getting rid of them. This is also when memories get consolidated. So I always tell students, for example, who are preparing for an exam and are like burning the midnight oil, actually, if you sleep, that will give your brain a chance to consolidate all of the information. You will do better, even if you didn't have those last 3 hours to prepare. Another thing which I find, especially with the people who have multiple responsibilities, such as parents who are working outside the home, or people who are caretakers for children and seniors in the house, is that they'll say, okay, I can't, I've got to do everything before I sleep, and so they will stay up, to do chores or whatever. The thing is, that 3 hours that you're spending, you could get that same amount of work done in a half an hour in the morning. Try it and you'll see what I'm talking about. We think we're being efficient, but our efficiency goes way, way down. Lack of sleep, if you think about it, how do people get tortured in prison? They keep them up,
Yeah.
they do not allow them to sleep. You can actually become psychotic with a lack of sleep.
Yes.
And of course, I'll let you sort of weigh in on that more, but anybody who's got an underlying mental health issue, lack of sleep is not good. And if you think about it, I would say that these days, all of us are struggling with our mental health in some shape, way, or form, right?
Well, lack of sleep can, as you mentioned, can lead to some sort of psychosis. It can lead to delirium. It can lead to really a psychotic break that because hallucinations are also part of sleep deprivation.
Hmm.
Really, and as you mentioned, it is a form of torture.
Hmm.
And I think about those few times where we've had to be up for extended periods of time and the impact that that had on our brain and our brain functioning. And that might just be maybe up for a 24-hour, period for whatever reason. And just think about if you did that over and over again. So we really need a traditional, on average, an adult needs 6 to 8 hours of sleep each evening. A child may require a little less, and as we get older, you
Actually,
know,
a child requires more.
no, that's right. I'm sorry.
More. Hmm.
Teenagers require way more. That can go up
Yes.
8 to 10 to 12 hours. I have one in my house right now. The boy can sleep, so as their
Well,
body is
and then
growing.
for children, actually, I mean, I don't know if you've ever heard of this, Mr. Ellis, but somebody will say, I put my, especially younger children, I put my child to sleep, and I swear they grew overnight, and they did.
Yes.
Most of the growing is actually when kids are sleeping. So making sure that children, really all of us, there's no group that we can say, oh, sleep is more important for this group and that group. It is important for all of us. And
We knew, especially when our son was going through the puberty growth spurt, that he was sleeping a tremendous amount, but he wasn't eating as much because he was just sleeping. And we're like, what's going on? He's not eating. And I was like, he's going through a growth spurt and his body has all it's needed. And he would, and we make a joke about it, but it was that summer. Um, for him, he's a little bit younger, so it was between 10th and 11th grade year. And we said he went in the room, he was 5'6", maybe. He came out, he was 5'10",
yeah,
and that was over a 2 month, two
yeah,
and a half month span, and it was just like and he recognized how much his
yes,
body had
yeah,
changed, and it was a hard adjustment because it was so quick
yep,
that that growth.
yep. So let's talk about things to do if you're having trouble sleeping. So I always tell people, especially that have had children, think about the routine that you used to have with your children. So I'm going to ask you this. When your babies were young, what would you do? What was the bedtime ritual?
But a ritual is typically one, you want to be consistent as a parent. So that's number one is consistency, to give them time and be firm on that time.
Mhm.
I would say the best ritual to do is if they have these devices, if they're old enough and they have one of these devices, you need to take this away from them at least an hour before bedtime
Mhm.
because they can't
I'm
put the
talking about babies, though. What
oh
did you
baby
do with your babies?
babies a nice warm bath always helped. And now they got lotions with aromatics that tends to help a little bit more. It gives you a little bit more enhancement. But a warm bath and then rocking motion, and we would hold
Mhm.
and rocking as soon as they would fall asleep. You don't want to fall asleep with them because they'll get too comfortable with
Mhm.
that. But with
Mhm.
babies, as soon as they fall asleep, you put them down, and they like that swaddling, and that's why you notice
Mhm.
they're very good at the hospital to do that and have to wrap it up because
Yeah.
it gives them sensation. Younger babies, it gives them a sensation of being in the
Yeah.
room, and so they'll tend to sleep longer when
Yeah.
they're there. Now, we're not practice swaddlers, but the more you can swaddle them in their blankets and
Mhm.
stuff, the better chance you can have them sleeping extended periods of time.
Yeah, actually, those weighted blankets
Yes.
are kind of recreating that. So what we do with children in general is we try to prepare them for bed. Okay, you're gonna wind down,
Hmm.
stop playing whatever games, and this, we can translate it to stop getting, on your phone. We usually tend to lower our voices
Yes.
and also turn down the lights, maybe change the lighting,
Yes.
reading a bedtime story after they've taken their bath and they're so cute in their little pajamas and they're nice and fresh. And then also, as you said, the scents. Here's
Yes.
something that I do, which I love. People sometimes save their perfume or colognes for like special occasions. I will actually spray it on the pillow. It's just
Mm.
such a nice way to be able to kind of drift off because I love that smell. But I think that one of the things I know I've lost during COVID is our attention spans have gotten like this. And
Yes.
reading, which I used to do all the time, it's just gotten to be challenging. So what I'm trying to do is just read short stories because
Yes.
reading is a really nice way of just kind of transitioning from that very active, almost hyperkinetic life that we lead. But those are things that can help. Remember to think about the five senses in anything. So, um, light. Okay, I was just in Egypt and came back a few days ago. In many cultures, people really understand that you want to have a space for sleep that is quiet and that is free of light. Now, that may not always be practical, but
Right.
we can cover our, eye mask to make sure that there is no light. So eyes, that's one sense, making sure that there is no light. Touch, putting things that feel nice on them. Babies, they like, as you said, the swaddling or the
Mm.
sheets or whatever. Sense, right?
Mhm.
Making sure that we have nice sense. Taste, not having big meals before you go to sleep, actually trying not to eat anything for 2 hours because that will increase things like reflux and you'll have difficulty just digesting the food. Avoiding things like alcohol, which can interfere with the food. We can obviously, and then what's the other sense? Hearing, yeah, making sure that it's quiet. Did we cover all the five senses? Yeah, I think we
You
did.
did, and there's some great. And the wonderful thing about technology is there are some great things that you can do to help enhance that. So there are some apps that can play some nice audible sounds, calm app. I'm not getting any endorsement. We're not getting any endorsement, but it's just saying. And there's a few others out there, but that if you're having trouble, difficulty sleeping, you can play those. And there's different sounds. Some of them are
Mhm.
just ambient noise, and some of them are like a a river running through, or the
Right.
sound of the beach, or whatever is most calming for you.
Yep.
Those type of sounds, but eliminate the light. And there's different lights that are the light that emanates from my TV is I believe it's a white or blue light. It's one of those lights that trick our brain to think it's we're supposed to stay awake. And so that's the one thing you cannot do, and which I am guilty of from time to time, is falling asleep in front of the television because you
Well,
do.
let me tell you, a lot of people have television sets in their bedrooms, and
Mhm.
I talk to my patients. They don't want to get rid of them, so I tell them at least cover the television so that that light that's
Yes,
emanating. Now there's so many light sources that is blocked. But the better thing is to actually move the TV out of the bedroom. Bedroom should be for sex and sleep, not eating or watching TV, unless it's a special occasion.
I would say if you have a television in your room, no judgment, but utilize your sleep timer, right? So
Right.
it doesn't stay on throughout the night because you've fallen asleep, because you're not going to reach that REM sleep with that light in the room, and you think you might because you're asleep. But I just say,
Mm-mm.
um, I would say, have your sleep timer. Know if you're starting to feel sleepy, even with the TV on. Set it for 30 minutes. It'll go off, and then that's a good way to um,
Great.
kind of trick yourself into turning off the TV without having to, so you can fall asleep and know that the TV will turn itself off, so you
Yeah.
have a good night's sleep.
I can't believe that we only have 5 minutes to the show. So before we wrap up, question, how do people like this format? Do you want to see more, less, or about the same in terms of this format for the show? What are some of the topics? I don't see anybody who's called in. Hopefully, people are listening, just shy in terms of.
There's been a few comments. We're getting back into this one now.
Yes, yes.
We'll be fine.
So, in wrapping up, we were going to talk about immunizations and autism. So, actually, one of my colleagues who was at GW before I left and then is now at Children's Hospital in Houston has a child who is autistic, and
Mm,
he is infectious disease and he does immunization work. So, autism and vaccines, there have been so many studies that have really debunked that association. But let me tell you what is linked to autism. Certain medications, like Depakote during pregnancy, which is a medication that's used for seizures,
mm,
Tylenol during pregnancy, which we
mm,
used to tell, I should say acetaminophen, we used to tell women all the time, don't take aspirin, don't take, ibuprofen, just take acetaminophen. And guess what? That's a risk factor.
mm.
The other thing is advanced paternal age, the
Yes.
age of the father. And so there are probably many toxins, but then there's also a strong genetic effect. So people say, well, is it because we're diagnosing more kids and we just recognize that there's an issue? Absolutely, that's a component. But in addition, the absolute number of cases of autism have gone up. And again, we're going to have a show just dedicated to that. So, in the last few minutes, I've got some tips about staying healthy and free of illness. So, I brought some props with me. These are nail brushes, and I don't get paid by any company. These are like $1 each. I think we forget that there is a lot of dirt that is under our, I'm just trying to, there we go, a lot of dirt under our nails. I always keep very short nails because I used to be a violin player. So that's why they're always short. Keeping short nails is great. However, given some of the fashion trends with women wearing longer nails, blah, 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 that might not be practical. But trying to scrub your nails when you wash your hands. And if you don't like that, there's the one that you can hold that's a little bit longer is
Mhm.
very important because there is dirt and viruses and other things that can be trapped. But one of the best things, and I will take this out so that it's not advertising any particular brand, soap. Washing your hands. When you come home, you wash your hands. Before you eat dinner or a meal, you wash your hands. It's interesting, as many people that I take care of and seeing in the clinic that are sick, I never get sick from clinic patients because I'm always washing my hands, right? I get sick from my family. So, but washing your hands. So, our ritual was you come home from school, you take off your your shoes, you change into, other clothes, you wash your face, you wash your hands, and then here is just any plain washcloth. You
Mhm.
wash behind your neck and behind your ears. It used to be a joke when, kids would go to the pediatrician. The mom would say, "Make sure you've got clean underwear." And
Mhm.
make sure that when you're washing, you wash and, bathe on. It turns out, believe it or not, there was a study looking at washcloths and washing behind your neck. And guess what? It reduced colds and viruses and infections. So washing is very important. It doesn't have to be antibacterial or just some plain soap and water, whatever you have. But getting into the habit of always washing your hands is, I think, probably the best way of preventing any infection. So with every show that we're going to have, I'm going to try to have some practical tips. Of really bringing back old school remedies that work.
That is a simple remedy, but it actually does work. So I would say look for areas, particularly those areas that you think you might be getting, but you're not really. You're doing the washover that looks like it might be, especially for people of color, hyperpigmentation, which is a fancy way of saying it looks a little darker than than it should. Back of the neck can happen, and that could just be
Mm-hmm.
dirt buildup. And
Mm-hmm.
so you get
Yep.
back there, and you clean it, and especially if you have a white washcloth like they give you in the hotels, you ever knows you wash it out. So you're like,
Like, oh
I'm that
man.
dirty, I'm that dirty. Clean those areas are extra. I actually have a special device that has a scrubber and put a little gin. So when I do my head, I do the back of my neck as
Mm-hmm.
well to clean that. Always check the back of your ears. If there's something that's crusted up, you're not hitting it right, right? You can scrape
Exactly.
that off of there. So there's little things that you can do that go a long way. It's
You know,
amazing. It was a
I
must.
forgot something. I forgot something, and that's your feet.
Yeah.
So
Use your
sometimes when
toes.
people are bathing or showering, they forget their feet. And especially for people as we get older or people who have diabetes, uh, foot care is really important. So after you've taken your shower, you can take either a cloth or like a washcloth, or my dad soaks some Q-tips in alcohol and he takes it in between each of
Toes.
his toes.
Yes.
And that can clear places to make sure that, because moisture, especially for people who have diabetes, is not good. That's a perfect medium for, fungi to grow, yeast to grow. So making sure that the area is dry, but also that you're cleaning it, and you can just use some alcohol or, whatever you want, cologne or whatever. And Q-tips work actually pretty well, or a washcloth.
And if you have the budget for it, you can go and get you a pedicure every once in a while. That because I actually been advised because I have a bunion on my in my right foot. It was causing me some pain, and a little corn had
Oh, yes.
on the outside. It became very painful.
Yes.
And so the doctor was like, "Well, she shaved it off," and she said, "You know what? Right now, it's not. It wasn't that bad." She said, "If you go get a pedicure because you get the foot massage with it, and they scrape that skin off of there, that should be able to maintain it without having to do anything more
Yeah.
dramatic." And absolutely, I said, "Look, I've just got
You
diagnosed with
realize you realize you sound like an old person,
I
right?
got diagnosed with pedicure." Yeah, she started laughing again. And yeah, I do sound like an old person, but it was literally it could happen from and I know we do this and we have a lot of women that are watching the shoes that are too tight.
Oh, yes.
Um, go up a size, whether it's a half a size or a full size. Trying to get cute and hurting your feet can impact these things in a very significant way. And I was doing that with the dress shoes, and then my golf shoes were really tight, and I thought it was okay because they were stylish, and I was aggravating that
Yeah.
area to the point where it was like, you know,
Well, what one thing that as you get older, you realize that comfort is more important than style. But that's great advice. And I just jotted another show idea, and that is foot care. because
Yes,
we need to have a podiatrist come in and talk with us. Yeah.
because the diet goes from the toes all the way up to the knee.
Yes.
They can all of that stuff.
Yes.
And so yeah, we could talk about shin splints and your Achilles and the importance of that and all of the foot
Yep.
care. So
Yep.
absolutely. Wow. Fast
Well,
hour.
time flies when you're having fun, Mr. Ellis. I so enjoy talking with you and really look forward to hearing from our audience about what topics resonated, what you think about the format, what things you want to hear more about, because this is your show.
Absolutely. So we'll look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks. And that's the 29th of May here with House Call with Dr. Gigi. See you next time.